and getting ready our next set of attorneys that we are preparing to get ready to step out into this area of so many things that are going on now that are so important, things that many of us have addressed for a significant time period and long time period, but are coming to the forefront again for the first time for many. But it's great to see that we have this participation across the board today from our state attorney's office, from Carlos Martinez's office and the public defender, private practice, also then from our police union being on board. And I think that's a testament, Dean, to your leadership to be able to gather this diversified group as we see how as FIU alums, we're able to impact our community. And we certainly plan to do so in a forceful and in a positive way. So with that, I want to bring in all of the other panelists today who can introduce themselves and move forward. Reginald, we'll start out with you as well over at the State Attorney's Office.
Good afternoon. First, I want to say thank you to Professor Cote, Dean Anthony Page, the SBA, the H.T. Smith Balsa chapter, for inviting us here today to be a part of this important conversation about the crisis that is happening in our country. So my name is Reginald Guillaume. I'm currently working as an assistant state attorney with the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. I started working in the office in 2017. In my time at the office, I've worked as a line prosecutor in county court. I was then promoted as a training attorney, where my role in that capacity included training prosecutors, teaching them how to conduct calendar calls, preparing cases for trial, and how to engage in plea negotiations. I then became an assistant chief in county court, where I oversaw DUI cases, traffic-related offenses, and direct files. I supervised several courtrooms and helped lead the training for a class of 50 or more prosecutors, and I now serve as a felony prosecutor in circuit court, where I prosecute felony and misdemeanor charges. Prior to working with the state attorney's office, I graduated from FIU in 2017, where I served as the former SBA president. I was also the bureau director for H.T. Smith and also a member of the new court.
Okay, great. Well, welcome aboard. Louis, you're up next.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, panelists and everybody at FIU. Thank you for having this conversation. I think it's extremely important. My name is Louis Fuste, and I graduated from FIU Law School way back in 2006. I started as part of the inaugural class in 2002. Prior to that, and continuing through my education at FIU, I was with the Miami-Dade Police Department. I became a police officer in 1983. Prior to that, I was a PSA in the state of Miami in 82. And prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps. And through my career in the police department, as an officer, then as a sergeant, and then as a lieutenant, I worked in various assignments. After my graduation from FIU Law School, I was assigned to the legal bureau within the police department, where I advised supervisors and road personnel on legal parameters with respect to their work performance and work functions on a day-to-day basis. About 2011, I was assigned to the union. Pursuant to our contract, you can be assigned to the union to carry out the functions of the union. I went kicking and screaming, to be quite frank. I wasn't a big union, quote unquote, kind of guy. But I was told that it's an entirely different world out there. And it opened my eyes to a lot of things that occur from the officers level. So I was there from 2011 to 2018, representing police officers in administrative matters, as well as quasi-criminal matters that are being looked at by the state attorney's office. In 2018, I left, opened up my own practice, but I still represent the officers within the South Florida Police Benevolent Association, as well as other clients. And again, I'm honored to be here and be part of this discussion.
Louis, thank you so much. Because of your background, you have a tremendous insight to this. Stedman and David and I are buddies, and we stay in touch with each other frequently. And in my line of work, try to make sure that their views are always adequately represented. And my son's in the Marines. So,
Semper Fi.
Yeah, Semper Fi. We have a running battle in the house for you Marine tough guys. And, I'm an A-10 pilot. So I always say, you guys talk tough, but when it goes down, you call us. So there we go.
I'm not gonna argue with you there.
There you go. All right, Louis, look forward to it. And you and I have to stay in touch with each other beyond this. Ms. Johnson, in Public Defender's Office, Carlos Martinez has done a tremendous amount of outreach and to do his very best to represent these indigent clients. And he and I have these conversations frequently about moving forward. And I know that you all are very dedicated to what you are doing there to make sure that everyone gets representation across the board. So please tell us more about yourself and your thoughts about where we are today and moving forward.
Hello, my name is Christavia Johnson. I would like to first thank you all for allowing me to be here. To BOSA and FIU and Dean Page. Also thank you to Professor Cote. I graduated from FIU Law in 2017 with Mr. Guillaume, and I began my career as an assistant public defender in Broward County. I've been there since 2018, early 2018. I began as a misdemeanor as public defender. Then I graduated to a felony attorney where I was a line third, and then I became a second. Now I am currently a assistant public defender in what in Broward County we call crossover. So there are juveniles that have dependency cases attached in the system. So basically it's kind of hard to explain, but the juveniles are in the dependency system and they also have delinquency cases pending. So we try to keep them in one courtroom so they have all their services, whatever they may require, and they're before the same judge. So their dependency judge is the same as their delinquency judge.
Okay, Ms. Johnson, I'm remiss there that did not mention Mr. Gordon Weeks and the other people that are there in your office moving forward in a good direction in Broward County. And thank you for your service to our community there. Kayla Smith on private practice will come in and give us a concept and idea of where they are with their firm and where we are today.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Keela Smith. I first want to thank everybody that put this on, but not only that, thank the participants for logging in and listening to this conversation. I graduated from FIU in 2014. When I graduated, I became a public defender in Miami for 5 years. So when I went there, I first defended those who were charged with misdemeanors. I went on to felonies to defend those who were charged with first-degree felonies, punishable by life felonies, and things of that such. After doing that for 4 years, I became a training attorney where I went back down to county court to teach young attorneys, those who are graduating, a lot like those 3Ls right now who are going to graduate and become public defenders. I was training those individuals on the Constitution, on how to hold the state to the fire, really, and make sure that people's rights are not being violated. That's what I love to do. I did that for 5 years. At this point, I'm at Fishery David, which is a law firm in Hollywood, Florida. There, I try civil cases, but primarily what I focus on there is criminal defense. And I do civil work, but I focus on criminal defense and the civil rights litigation there. So that's where my passion is, that's where my heart is. And so that's my background.
Awesome. Kayla, do us a favor, because
Yes.
you have an incredible smile. Move over to a little bit to the right. Move over to the right. There we go. Now we can completely and fully see you there.
Okay.
So, okay, perfect. I want to turn it back over to the dean for his, comments in terms of where we are, where the law school is addressing these matters. So, Dean Page.
Thank you, Willard. So, the law school is doing a variety of things in response to this particular situation. We've always been committed to racial justice, but it's become really clear over the events of the last month, and frankly, it should have been clearer before, that we really haven't been doing enough. Now, there are a couple of initiatives that we have planned. Obviously, these panels are simply a first response, if you like, but there's a variety of different things that we have planned. One that you should watch for a press release later this week, but we're working with the other, I believe it will be the other 12 law schools on a consortium that will specifically focus on racial justice. And there will be opportunities for students. We plan to work with community partners. And what I really like about this initiative, it's all 12 of the Florida law schools standing up and acknowledging that as the schools where we are developing future lawyers, we have a special obligation in these times. So watch for an announcement later this week. In addition, we're working with other law schools right across the country on a virtual clinic that will focus in particular on police brutality. Now, this is taking a little longer to get off the ground because we're looking at about 30 law schools right across the country that will be involved in this, and we're working on governance structure and funding, but that's something that I think will be ready for announcement at some point in about the next month or so. We're also looking at things internally. In particular, what we do, we are a majority minority school, we're majority first generation, but there are always more things we can do to make sure that all of the members of our community feel included, feel welcome, feel valued. And so we at the law school are looking also not just at what can be done externally, but also looking inside our own house at how we can improve. So those are some of the things. We're certainly trying to act both quickly, but also intentionally and deliberately, as I do think as South Florida's public law school, we have a particular and specific obligation given all of the problems right across the country.
Okay. Let's go to Reginald there in your office. Tell me about the kind of across the board, the message that the state attorney has sent to you all, and your mission there in terms of making sure that justice is fair in terms of the prosecutions and things that you are doing there across the board, not just now, but even in the past, before all of this came to the forefront again, about making sure that everyone is treated fairly.
Thank you for your question. And so when I started my career in the state attorney's office, I had an opportunity to meet, Ms. Fernandez Rendell and Mr. Don Horn, who is a pillar in the community in terms of being a prosecutor in Miami-Dade County and the work that he's done. And so one of the things that they really instilled in us when we first started working there is that we are ministers of justice. And what is a minister of justice? And so a minister of justice, as a prosecutor, we have to make sure that when we are prosecuting our cases, that we look at our cases, we look to see whether or not we could bring a charge against an accused individual. We have to make sure that their rights are known to them at the time that they're being prosecuted, and also that we have to take into consideration, one, whatever information that we have from their defense attorney, whether it be a public defender or private defense attorney, whatever information that they have to present to us, we have to assess that information to make sure that we are seeing things from both ends, from the state side in terms of the crimes we're prosecuting, but also in mitigating factors that the defense attorney is presenting in terms of the case, showing us whether or not we have weaknesses in our case. Is this a case that the state can indeed prosecute? Like Ms. Smith has said, I've been in court with Ms. Smith and we've had a couple of cases together. She does hold my feet to the fire in terms of the cases that I prosecute. And so there is a standard that, within our office, that we prosecute cases that we believe that we could bring and we have to do our job to prosecute it. And if we see any things that, if the case can't go forward, then we are not going to go and prosecute a case where we know there is information that shows that this person did not commit a crime, that the law doesn't support us to go forward on a case where we don't have the probable cause, we don't have the evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's been my experience since I started with the state attorney's office. And so, at least in my role, because I've had different roles as a line prosecutor, as a supervisor, you know, I take it upon myself to, when I have individuals that come to me and they have cases where they have questions and they're asking me, how do we go forward with a case? I make sure to the best of my abilities that I educate them. I ask them the hard questions in terms of, what are we doing here? Do we have sufficient evidence to go forward on our cases? What are the mitigating factors that a defense attorney is presenting in terms of their client? Is this the type of cases where we're seeking jail? Is this a case where somebody deserves a diversion program? Because it's really important to make sure that we're looking at these cases one by one and making sure that each defendant gets the justice that they deserve.
All right, Reginald, let me follow up with one thing for you. A lot of times, and you know, in my world, I deal with a lot of people from the community and different backgrounds who feel that that the investigations take such a lengthy time period, many times, especially when it involves police officers, and obviously they deserve their due process. So how do we balance due process with what the community at times feels is something that may be plain for them to see, especially because we have these body cameras and everybody has a camera now? How do we balance that, and just talk to us about that?
Sure. It's a fine balance, right? So the law allows us in terms of when we have cases that are filed, at least at the felony level, we have first within 21 days where we get to assess whatever evidence that we have in a case to file a case. If not, you know, the state is entitled to a reset to the 30th day for us to file the charges. You know, with every cases that we receive, you know, there has to be a thorough investigation of that case, especially now. Now, within the last 3 years, we've transitioned into the age of technology where we now have body camera that's available to our use. But there still needs to be an investigation where we have civilian witnesses that come in to our offices, where we interview them. We have to speak to our police officers. We have to talk to, for example, if there were CSI experts that came out and investigated a scene, there is quite an amount of investigation that needs to be done. And we want to make sure that we're filing cases where we can actually go forward on the case. And you know, it's important for us to know, to assess the quality of the evidence that we have. It's important for us to make sure that we're able to move forward with the case. And generally, why it takes a long time, and especially when we see, you know, things that a regular civilian would feel like it's a clear and cut case. However, there's still the law that we must follow. And so the law really streamlines how we could go forward with the case.
Okay. Lewis, I want to bring you into this conversation, and we've heard a lot about this term called defunding the police. I've tried my best on NBC to try to say that from my education about this, and for those of you who don't know, the president of the Miami-Dade PBA, Mr. Stahl, Stedman Stahl, he and I had this conversation the other day. This term, defund the police, what I believe 95% of people that are calling for that are actually talking about changing resources, making sure you have more job counselors, psychological counselors, social workers to aid police officers so that the police don't actually have to do that and they can do their real job. You've lived in all these worlds. What are your thoughts about that? And transitioning funds. I think defunding the police is a bad way to try to describe that.
Well, thank you, Wayne. Thank you for the question. I agree with you. Listen, my family business was into marketing. So marketing or positioning is key to a movement or to anything you want to get across to the public. And I think the term defunding the police it sets a bad tone. The actual verbiage itself kind of invokes people saying, well, you want to undo the police department. Look, I agree. If your definition of defunding the police is providing better resources for all the ancillary and supplemental or support units that you're talking about, there isn't a police department and or police chief that will disagree with you. I will tell you this, that officers, when they're called to scenes with respect to either mental issues or social issues, by the time we get there, there's something already broken or that requires to be fixed, and not from a police level. I mean, at the end of the day, our job is to be guardians. We protect the public. At times, you have to switch that hat and become what's known as warriors, and that's a big debate in the culture we're talking about now. Are we guardians or are we warriors? Obviously, I'm of the belief, and so is the PBA, that we're really all guardians. We protect the people. To get officers involved in issues that have their roots either in mental illness, which that can be an entire panel on how the American Medical Association started treating their patients as outpatients, putting the responsibility on the criminal justice system, putting the responsibility on correctional officers, and putting the responsibility on the family members is problematic. And that happened back in the late 70s. And I got that information from one of the current judges who was handling that project here in Miami. It was shocking to me how something that happened 20, 30 years ago can still have echoing effects on the public. Now, with respect to, let me give an example which has been cited often in the media about Camden, New Jersey. Now, my understanding there is the police department was funded by the state. They were having tremendous budget issues back in 2011 to the point where they let go of 100 and something police officers, thus not allowing to serve the community. Crime went through the roof. Issues were not being resolved, and the people who stayed on were disheartened, not addressing the issues of the community. They eliminated the police department, started a new local police department, conducted new interviews, and hired 85% of the force back to the department, the same officers. They increased the budget, better training, and they took more of a guardian approach, better community outreach, better efforts to reach out to the public to have a partnership. I'm a little biased, clearly. Miami-Dade Police Department, I think our department is head and shoulders above the rest. I would even say above the nation. We went through our growing pains in the 80s. I was here in the department in 83 when there was a great deal of civil unrest. Our department today mirrors the community of polices. Is there room for improvement? Definitely. But I think if you take money away from the police department to fund something else, all you're doing is playing with line items, and the problem will surface then in crimes. I actually think you need more resources and more funding to both the police department as well as social services to aid the department in their job to protect and serve.
Okay. Do you think these funds, and I'm talking about social workers, mental counselors, drug counseling, these types of things, should that be under the police department in your view, or outside of the police department in a different fashion? What are your thoughts about that? Because I've had so many officers say to me, hey, look, no matter what happens now, somebody calls 911 and we're the ones that go there. I'm not a drug counselor. I'm not a psychiatrist.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. The fact that by the time we get there, listen, I used to work gangs, and it broke my heart when I'd get to the gang members' families, the residents, and whether they were white, Hispanic, Black. I always found an underlying, obviously I'm not a psychologist, so mine would be more of a street analysis, but I always found there'd be something broken in the home that perhaps a counselor could help. Maybe some more activities for the kids so they're not on the street. Sometimes it was parents that were just absent. Other times it's parents just trying to make ends meet and working double jobs. At the end of the day, the child was being neglected in some form and maybe followed influences that he shouldn't be or she shouldn't be following. That broke my heart. So to me, I think a department like that should be run outside the police department with some type of communication, maybe a joint board to speak. I don't want to get it too bureaucratic, because being on the department for 32 years, I realized some things are extremely layered and bureaucratic. And although the intention is well placed, the small or the individuals that really require the help get lost in the shuffle. And that would be sad, because the bigger the bureaucracy is, the worse it is for the public.
Ms. Johnson, I'm sure that you would like to have more resources. What are your thoughts on this about being able to do some preventive measures so you don't end up with these clients?
So as a public defender, I've noticed that our clients come from different backgrounds, have faced different issues. And I know in Broward, we have a few courts that handle some of the issues, whether it's mental health or drug court, but I feel like something should happen before they get to the court system. Like me being in juvenile, you can see like a lot of kids are, for things that when I was younger, you may have got suspended for or went to internal suspension, kids are being shuffled into the system. So there needs to be more in place where funding for like diversionary programs for the kids. I'm not in Miami, so I'm not familiar with the amount of diversion programs that Miami has. I'm more familiar with Broward, but I know like there's not as many programs, so there needs to be funding for those things to try to help at that level. I know we also have issues with low-level crimes being charged. So we get cases when I was in felony court where they have 0.05 grams of cocaine and this person is facing prison, and we have to deal with that. So like things like that, knowing when to, like Mr. Guillaume was saying, when to file a case, how to look at the circumstances of everything. I understand the defund the police situation is allocating the funds. Yes, police officers aren't social workers, aren't drug counselors, but they should be working with people that are those, so they understand how to de-escalate situations when something occurs. How do you handle a mental health patient? You don't go to them guns blazing. You have to sometimes talk that person down, get the right people involved. That's where those resources need to come in, where you need how to handle those situations when you have a certain population of people that need the help. So that's where that's my stance on that, because it's tough trying to navigate the criminal justice system by putting someone in jail. Like that doesn't solve the issue. It's that person still has the issue. Sending someone to prison doesn't solve the issue. We need the funding in order to get the services the people need.
Okay, Ms. Smith, you can bring somewhat of a private perspective to this. What are your thoughts?
Yes, well, I can actually bring both perspectives as a former public defender and as a private attorney working doing criminal defense and civil rights. You know, I think part of the problem, we talk about training, we talk about all of these things, and when they're talking about, I guess, defund the police, some are saying to take those resources and put them other places, but some are really saying dismantle the police. There are a lot of bad apples, as people like to say, inside the police department. But it's not just the police, it is the state attorney's offices, it's the judges, it's everyone. This is not just, oh, let's do some training, let's give police officers more money and more resources. This is about, let's see what the bad apples are in there, right? Let's dismantle the police department. Let's get them psychological evaluations. Let's see if the ones who are out on the streets protecting us, they know the law and that they are psychologically well. You know, it doesn't make sense in our system where we hold police officers who have the most power, we hold them the least accountable. We have citizens out on the streets where, you know, if you do anything, you are arrested immediately. And now the state attorney's office have to make this decision as to whether to bring those charges or whether to put you in prison. Where when an officer does something, there's all of these questions. Now the state attorney's office has to do an investigation to see if a crime was really committed. So I think the problem is within the laws themselves. Why is there qualified immunity? Why is it that these people with badges and guns and a license to kill are held less accountable? We live in a country where I have to deal with this as a defense attorney. You know, we live in a country where we talk about deterrence. We're not a rehabilitation country. We are a country that focuses on deterrence. So why is it that when a citizen is arrested, the state attorney's office asks for jail so that this person can not commit crimes in the future. Whereas a police officer who does something wrong, commits a crime, now it's about rehabilitation. Now it's about, well, let's get them training. So I think at a ground root, we are talking about issues in this society where all of us should galvanize and say, what we're trying to work within a system as it exists now. We should think about, in a system, how would this system work for the Black and brown community? It's not working as it is now, so what can we do to fix it? And I think holding police officers accountable for, because they should be, and they should actually be held more accountable because they are the ones with the license to kill. We're talking about talking to the state attorney's office. Why is it that there are different plea offers for one individual, whereas another for a white individual? Where is the fairness in any of this? So why not talk to the state attorney's offices and get them on board? Because although Reginald brings up a lot of points, it's not all this. It doesn't work that way. You know, Reginald can train. He can talk to his supervisors, but at the end of the day, it's KFR at the top, and whoever's at the top and makes the rules, that's how it's going to work. So that's talking to them. Talk to the judges about their biases, not just implicit biases, not always implicit, but let's talk about why is it that sentencing might be different from this Black individual, whereas you believe that a white individual can be rehabilitated. So there are issues that are not being dealt with that we can do more if we just come together on the same page and attack every stage of the criminal and justice system.
Lewis, to Ms. Smith's point, and I'm getting people who are participating with us asking questions, and to follow up on a point that she made, Lewis, what is your viewpoint about initially taking officers in? The question here I have is basically you need a high school diploma or a GED, and that do those requirements need to be changed just on a fundamental basis as to who the police department will accept in the first place?
Well, I can answer that question. I mean, I'm not in human resources. I know that the Miami-Dade Police Department changed their hiring standards, and there was a time there, I don't know if it's still in place now, they were requiring a 2-year degree in college. To her point about psychological evaluations, every single Miami-Dade police officer, before they get hired, has to go through a psychological, an extensive background. It takes about 9 months. And to be quite frank, we're having a very difficult time hiring individuals that meet the criteria. Same with corrections. Our corrections department, I speak to the director in corrections all the time, and he tells me it's just difficult to find the people that qualify. Your record has to be clean. You can't have any issues with your credit history. Obviously, certain arrests are permissible, other felonies are not. Plus, you have to pass a psychological, and that psychological is an extensive psychological. Now, as to the point about officers are held to a different standard, I personally feel my experience has been in dealing with the state attorney's office and dealing with internal affairs investigators, as well as the federal government. We are held to different standards. I've had police officers that get arrested and can't do a plea on certain cases because the state attorney's office says, no, we're not going to do a plea with you, whether it's a DUI. I had a case recently that made the media where an individual appeared to abuse his daughter on camera. And the judge told the state attorney anybody else would be a pretrial, would be some anger management course. And the prosecutor said, absolutely not. This is a police officer, not something they did on duty. That's another thing. Officers are held to a standard on or off duty. The example I always give is if I walk into Home Depot right now and get into an argument with an individual, and that individual calls my department and says, I don't like the way this guy treated me. Who is he? Well, he's a lieutenant for the police department. Yeah, but was he working? No, he wasn't working. They still have to do an investigation on my behavior off duty. There's no other civilian that I know that is checked on their behavior when they're off duty. Now, that is the Miami-Dade Police Department. I can't speak for the state of Miami or any other department in the United States. I do know that on average in this country, there's 1,000 arrests of police officers a year, an average of 3 a day. That statistic is easily verified. And there's over 800,000 police officers in this country. 10 million arrests. Of the 10 million arrests, 586,000 are violent felonies. If you do the math, that's one violent felony arrest a minute. So while we've been on this panel here, it's been approximately 43 minutes. There's been 43 violent felony arrests in this country. Is there room for improvement? Definitely. Do I believe that there should be social programs to avoid people from getting into the system? 100%. Do I believe in pre-trial diversion? I personally do. I've seen it work. I think that unfortunately, by the time we get there, the police officer gets there, a lot of the issues have not been dealt with. And law enforcement, yes, it's there to protect and serve, but we're not therapists, we're not psychologists. We do receive training on mental issues, critical incident management training in the department. But even the individual who puts that classes together will tell you, if individuals are in crises and there is de-escalation procedures in place in the county, there comes a point in time where that individual may, for unknown reasons, want to hurt you, and you still have to protect your life. Again, just to put it out there, I don't agree with the images we see with Mr. George Floyd. Clearly, as an attorney, I can tell you I don't know what happened there. A video image is just a two-dimensional image. There are many things going on there, but I can't see a justification for that with respect to what I see on the image. And I've been a police officer for 32 years, and I've been in those situations. I've been involved in shootings. It's not a pleasant feeling. You feel like your life is over right then and there. Something that I think the public doesn't fully understand, that in those split-second decisions, unless there's enough training, and not just training, but conditioning, anybody who's been in the military will understand that they're going to revert back to your natural human instinct of fight or flight. And the only thing that will mitigate that is the training and conditioning, which is continued training. So it almost becomes muscle memory.
Dean, if you can step in here as to how the university as a whole, and not just our law school, can interject the skill sets that we have to address these matters across the board.
Sure, and thank you. In fact, I think I can address that fairly quickly. I'm going to encourage anybody who didn't see our panel from last week. That panel focused specifically on community alliances and allegiances and allyship in general. And it really focused on what people can do. That was in fact a panel topic that was motivated from our very first session, where a lot of people in the community and a lot of students really felt almost powerless. And so I would recommend that people tune in to the recording is on our website at FIU Law. And I think there are a lot of ideas there for what individuals can do. I think you also mentioned the university in general. Of course, as the university, we're part of the state university system, and there are various constraints. But the president has announced the president of the university has announced a task force which is going to look at specifically what is going on at the university and where we as a university can improve.
Okay. I want to give each of you a minute or so to kind of wrap up your thoughts here. I'm getting some questions specifically from Professor Washburn about qualified immunity. So whichever one of you wants to tackle that, but Reginald, we'll start with you with your closing remarks.
Yes, thank you. I think we are in an incredible time in our nation for us to continue to address this issue. And so one of the things that I say often is that, this is something that's been happening within our country. And now the voice of the people are finally being listened to. And so what I want to do and encourage a lot of our, FIU law students in going into the workforce, if you choose to become a prosecutor, a public defender, private attorney, or you want to go into private practice, know that you have a voice, and that your voice, you became an advocate for a reason, and that you have to speak against racial injustices anywhere. And don't shy away from the fact that you are a new graduate when you come into your position. If you were hired in a position, wherever it may be, it's because there is a reason. They recognize your potential. They recognize that you have what it needs to be an advocate. And so I encourage you, please speak up. I had an opportunity to share with my colleagues at the state attorney's office how I felt about the incident that involved that happened with George Floyd, and that led into a greater conversation within the office where a number of our colleagues had to attend, and we're having a lot of follow-up conversations about that. And also, it gave me an opportunity to speak with my direct supervisors that weren't aware of some of the stuff that was happening. And so in using my voice and voicing that, the way that George Floyd was murdered truly affected me, affected the work that I was doing, because I wanted to be a prosecutor, because I wanted to effectuate change in the criminal justice system. And I want to continue to prosecute crimes, and I want to make sure that we are doing the right things and that we're not letting people that commit crimes just go away. And so if we're holding Black people accountable, white people should be held accountable, Hispanic people should be held accountable, men should be held accountable, women should be held accountable. And it shouldn't be a tipping scale of the justice system. And so I encourage you, speak up. Your voice is needed. You chose this profession for this very reason. We believe it. Thank you.
Louis, what would you want to leave with us?
I want to leave with this. Obviously, I agree with what Reggie's talking about. At the end of the day, I think equal justice for all is extremely what the system, the way it should work. But at the end of the day, look, in my opinion, and again, this is me speaking personally, there is no police department. There is no criminal justice system. At the end of the day, it's all made up of people. People make up, to quote a legal doctrine, it's, the people are the agent of the entities they represent collectively. So when I hear the department this, for police officers this, for state attorney's offices, it's individuals. And the only way individuals, in my opinion, can come together and reach some type of agreement is by opening up dialogue, communicating, exchanging. I'm going to view things, obviously, from my perspective. I have my point of view, my experiences. It doesn't mean I'm closed-minded to something else. The only way to do this is to sit down and talk. And with respect to changes, obviously, my department is completely different in its makeup and its behavior and how it functions, police functions. And when I started in '83, I'm a firm believer that the only thing that never changes is the fact that everything changes. And I know that being part of the union draws a lot of negative attention, that we protect police officers. The only thing we do at the union is, again, quoting what Ms. Smith says, holding the state to the fire. I agree with that as a police officer, and I agree with that as a union attorney. If you're going to bring a case to a police officer or an individual, and you do not have your information right, you should not be doing it. To me, that is the greatest injustice you can do. Great, put your case together. I've had police officers keep their jobs, not because they didn't do anything wrong, it's because the department rushed to get an investigation done. Political pressure from the top, I don't know, didn't bother to look into it, and they get sloppy. And the one thing I learned in FIU law, my criminal law professor, they told me, listen, I had a great run as a defense attorney in Washington, D.C. And I said, well, you just told me how bad the Washington, D.C. Police Department is, because the defense attorney's job is to hold the state to the fire. I agree with that statement 100%, and it applies to police officers as well as all citizens. And with respect to qualified immunity, as we all know, that applies to civil lawsuits. It doesn't apply to criminal. You can't avail yourself of qualified immunity and protect yourself when you violated a law. What it allows you to do is the courts to step into the mind of a police officer in a given situation with an objective standard, not subjective, not whether that police officer felt in fear, but whether a reasonable police officer in that officer's shoes, considering the training of that officer, would have done the same thing. It's a reasonableness standard. By getting rid of it, what the standard you're going to put to the police department is they had to be correct. In other words, that motion by that individual, which looked like a gun and turned out to be, unfortunately, maybe some other object, you have to wait for that officer to ensure that it's a firearm. It's a very, very dangerous position to be in. I've been in that position. I've been shot at numerous times. It's not comfortable. And to be quite frank, it's something that I'm glad I left behind, because it is taxing on the body and on the mind. I just think that having a dialogue is the only way to get this thing done, and obviously putting words into action.
Okay. Louis, in terms of dialogue, in my office at NBC, and when you get done, you can reach out to David, Mr. Jenkins, and Stedman, we have a survey that we would love to do anonymously with the members of the union about what their thoughts are about all of these things and some of the matters that you addressed. And we're waiting to hear back about that, and I'm sure you'll have an opinion about that. So if you could discuss that with them, I would certainly appreciate it.
We'll go ahead, just real quick, William, understand something, that the union doesn't set policy by the department. The union negotiates a contract with the county itself. The department itself is in charge of setting policy. I think JP Perez before Freddie Ramirez did a great job. I think Freddie Ramirez is doing an excellent job with the police department. So again, the union represents the officers, but it's the department that pushes its policy and its procedures on how to handle policing.
Yeah, no, this is really, and I'll talk to you offline about that, but it's
Okay.
not about policy. It's just about what they think about doing their job and how they feel things and improvements that could be made. And we want their input to make sure that their voices are heard. So,
Agreed.
Ms. Johnson, please.
My closing thoughts are for the FIU community. You're entering into a new profession. You know, you're aware of the laws and everything that's going on. Whatever route you choose to go, whether it's public service, whether it's private. When we have this conversation about what's going on in the world with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of those people, we have to stop and think. A lot of people are going against the whole Black Lives Matter movement. I feel like people have to check their privilege and where they stand as regards to, and have to understand where a person of color is coming from when they have encounters with the police. So our experience isn't the same across the board. Even here in Broward County, even with the body cameras that are available, the whole issue with the older guy and the protests, I can't remember what state, police not telling the truth. So we have that issue even now, and when we're going through cases, because our clients will tell us what happened, but the police report is written up one way, then you see the body camera and it shows something totally different, and the accountability needs to be, like was mentioned before, the police need to be held to the fire. The state attorneys do too. They need to do their job and check the body camera footage, because there's so many things that don't have to go through the system if only we watch the body camera and not just rely specifically on a police report, because the police report doesn't say everything. We also have to think about our kids. What are we exposing them to? I work in the juvenile system, and our kids are constantly in the system for things that are petty. Why is a kid that has a little tuffle with another child getting arrested? Why is he going to the detention center? Why can't that be handled internally? There's so many resources that need to be allocated to help our juveniles, because they shouldn't be exposed to the system in the first place, for especially minor things that need to be done outside. There needs to be funding to help our kids. And in the juvenile system, the majority of kids I see are Black and brown kids. I don't see many Caucasian kids come through the system. So we need to we need the police officers to check their biases also, because I can have a kid that gets arrested for marijuana, and then another kid that smokes marijuana all the time is on Instagram that's Caucasian, he's not getting arrested. Or we have to look at those things. Why is the officer more inclined to approach someone of color rather than someone that's not of color? Why are people of color being penalized more for crimes? Like I mentioned earlier, I had cases when I was in felony, there's 0.05 grams of cocaine. This is residue. Why are we charging this as a third-degree felony? Why is it not a possession of paraphernalia? Why are we saying, okay, this person needs to go to jail because he was stopped on the bike and the police officer happened to find some cocaine residue somewhere in a little baggie or something? Like, it's little petty crimes that need to be, the state attorney's office needs to do something internally, and the police officers, they need to look at those things too, because some people they decide to give civil citations to. I've had Caucasian clients that got civil citations before they ever were even in the juvenile system, and some of my kids, their first crime is a possession of marijuana, but they're getting arrested. Why? What's the difference? The only difference is one is of color. So we have to check our privilege and see, like, what advantages do we have? what are your biases when you see a Black or brown person? Is your first instinct to be on guard? I've had there's educated people that get pulled over by the police, and there's been encounters where their first instinct is they pull a gun. Why are you pulling a gun for a traffic stop? So all these things need to be looked into. Like, these police officers need to be held to the fire. Our office has tried to do that with like exposing body camera footage. There was a case in Broward a couple months ago where a guy was having a mental health issues. He was in the hospital. The officer punched him in the face. He's handcuffed to a bed. That's not okay. And that didn't come to light, but for a body cam that they thought they turned off, that they took the body camera off, but they didn't think it was recording, and they're punching a guy in the face while he's chained to a hospital bed. So that's something else that needs to be looked into, the officer's control of body cams, because even as a defense attorney, there's so much control over those body cams with sound. They cut sound on, off, the body cams on and off, and we miss things. So things could happen, like 1 minute on the body cam, our client looks fine. The next minute they have bruises and they're being charged with resisting. So there's gaps in things. So those things need to be looked into, and I believe the state attorney's office, as an arm of the police department, have to look at their officers. What are their officers being investigated for? Why does it take 12 internal affairs investigations before someone gets caught on body camera? Why isn't this person being checked before they have to kill someone? Or things need to be checked ahead of time, instead of like something coming to the media and they're saying, oh, he's had 12 excessive use or 20 excessive use of force complaints. So that's my piece on everything that's going on. But we have to hold the police accountable. Yes, they are humans, but their job is to protect and serve. Our kids shouldn't be afraid when they see the police officer, and African Americans shouldn't be afraid when they see a police officer. They should feel like that person's there to help them, not to think about whether or not they're going to live or die at the end of the day. And that's what I say.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smith.
There was a 20-year-old Black man that police officers believed had trespassed at an establishment. They beat him unconscious, 5 officers, and dragged him across the street. And when a civilian who was a nurse said, I can help this young man, these 5 police officers said, no, we got it. And they threw his property on top of him. That's an untold story. George Floyd, that's just a story that's told. Ahmaud Arbery, that's just a story that's told. This is a problem. This is a systematic problem. Systematic racism is not just a phrase, it is a way of living for many of us. So when you ask, what can we do? What can getting rid of qualified immunity do? Of course, you guys are talking to practitioners. The reason for this panel is so that you guys can get an inside look at not what the theory of everything is, but what we do on a daily basis and what we see. And so when we're talking about qualified immunity and it being civil, what we're talking about at the end of the day is holding people accountable. Where you talk about, an objective standard for something like qualified immunity, us practitioners know that when we walk in court, that officer is not going to be held accountable because that objective standard is very, very much looked at in the officer's favor. So what I'm talking about is when you have officers coming in depositions, sworn depositions, and lying, hold those officers accountable. When we have officers shooting men, black women, unarmed, hold those officers accountable. We're not talking about the felonies that some should not be felonies to begin with, but we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is systematic racism. So the media can help by publicizing a lot of these untold stories. The prosecutors can help by when their superiors tell them to go after something they don't believe in, that they have a backbone, that they have discretion, because the line prosecutors should have discretion. They are the ones who are living and breathing and talking to the defense attorneys. We're talking about police officers. I've been talking about police officers all day, but we're not talking about getting rid of everything. What we're talking about is readdressing a lot of these issues that are actually just Jim Crow laws. What we're talking about is talking to judges and having them come back and say, look at these cases. Yes, prosecutor, I see this. Yes, defense attorney, I see this. But why is it last week you gave a white man a better offer? We're talking about every single layer being a part of this discussion. And it just starts here. This is a wonderful, wonderful panel. I love talking on this panel, and we need more of this. We need more discussions, because without discussions, there can be no action. So all I'm saying is we need to talk to every layer in this criminal and justice system and civil, because although we're talking about criminal, it bleeds into civil, because no one cares until you hit their pockets. So I just ask that everyone, the FIU future alums out there, the alumni, the teachers, the professors, everyone, just hold yourselves accountable. Think about what you can do on a daily basis. Think about a person or an organization that you can get involved in that can further our cause, because right now we are still living and breathing under Jim Crow laws. And until that changes, there's not going to be a lot of movement that we can do. So I thank you guys for having this discussion. I thank you for having this panel, and I would obviously come back at any time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Before I send it over to the Dean for his closing remarks, I want to thank each of you again and all of those who joined us on the Zoom panel. I think this is something we should continue going forward as you talk about the discussion. The great thing here is all of us have our law school in common, but as we can see, we all have different skill sets, and the way to solve many of these problems is to bring people who have many different skill sets together to address them in a unified fashion. And I think that's the greatest thing that we can get out of our conversation today. So Dean, I'll send it over to you for your closing thoughts. And again, thank you for your brainchild of having this, and not just this before, and moving forward.
Thank you very much. And I must say, please don't think of my words as the last words or closing words. Please think of what our panelists and what Willard said as truly the last words. I'd like to echo that. Thank you very much to Gustavia and Lewis and Keela and Reggie, and of course to Willard. It should be obvious to everyone why I am so proud of FIU law graduates. You are fantastic. I think it's also obvious that there is a lot of work to do, and we really must put words into action. I'd also just like to thank Jasmine Grant and also Professors Cote, Wasserman, and Anglad for all of their assistance in this series. Finally, I would like to recommend the movie Just Mercy. This is about the wrongful capital conviction of Johnny D, and it's available for streaming until the end of the month on virtually every platform. We will also be running a panel on July 22nd at 5:30 that will discuss both the film and more generally issues of race in the criminal justice system. And you'll hear more from us on that. So with that, thank you once again to everyone for being here, and of course to our panelists and our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.